The music faded as her trembling fingers gripped my shoulder. "Please don't leave me tonight," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm raging outside. In that moment, everything changed between us. Hey everyone, if this story already has you wondering what happens next, hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories that explore those unexpected moments that change our lives forever. Your support means everything. I never expected to see my boss, Catherine Reynolds, the iron-willed CEO of Meridian Technologies, looking so vulnerable. The company retreat was supposed to be a standard team-building weekend at a remote mountain lodge. As the newest senior developer on the team, I was still trying to find my footing in the corporate hierarchy. Catherine had a reputation for being brilliant but ruthless, the kind of boss who demanded perfection and accepted nothing less. Most of the staff called her the Ice Queen behind her back. The first day went as expected: trust falls, problem-solving exercises, and awkward small talk over mediocre catered food. I kept to myself mostly, observing the dynamics of my colleagues, trying to understand the unspoken rules of this new workplace. The tension in the air was palpable, everyone performing for the watchful eyes of upper management, desperate to make a good impression. That evening, the weather forecast warned of an approaching storm. Some nervous glances were exchanged, but Catherine assured everyone that the lodge was well equipped for such situations. "We've weathered worse," she said with that confident smile that had graced the covers of business magazines. I noticed how everyone immediately relaxed at her words, their faith in her leadership absolute. Everyone except me. I caught the slight tightening around her eyes, the almost imperceptible tremor in her hand as she gestured toward the windows. By nightfall, the storm had intensified beyond anyone's expectations. Wind howled through the trees surrounding the lodge, and rain lashed against the windows with frightening force. The power flickered once, twice, and then went out completely, plunging us into a darkness so complete it felt almost solid. Nervous laughter rippled through the group, quickly silenced by a particularly violent gust that made the entire building creak ominously. In the darkness, someone found emergency lanterns, casting the main hall in an eerie, amber glow that transformed familiar faces into masks of shadow and light. The retreat coordinator tried to maintain morale by suggesting we continue with the planned evening activities, a casual dance social meant to break down hierarchical barriers. The forced cheerfulness in his voice only highlighted the growing unease permeating the room. Most people huddled in small groups, speaking in hushed tones about the worsening conditions outside. I wandered to the large windows, watching lightning illuminate the violent landscape. The forest surrounding the lodge transformed with each flash, trees bent at impossible angles, branches whipping like desperate arms reaching for safety. That's when I noticed Catherine standing alone, her silhouette rigid against the glass, a solitary figure outlined by intermittent bursts of electric blue. "Quite a storm," I said, immediately regretting the banality of my comment. The words felt hollow against the magnitude of nature's fury unfolding before us. She didn't turn. "I've always hated storms." Her voice carried a weight I hadn't heard before, each word heavy with something that felt like ancient grief. Something in her tone made me pause. It wasn't the confident voice I'd heard in meetings or the sharp directives she issued across conference tables. It sounded almost fragile, like fine crystal on the verge of shattering. "My parents died in a storm like this," she continued, still facing the window. "Car accident when I was 12. The roads were flooded, visibility was near zero. They were coming to pick me up from a friend's house." Her fingers pressed against the glass, leaving ghostly impressions that faded with her breath. I waited for hours by the window, watching the rain, certain they would appear any minute. I stood silently, unsure how to respond to this unexpected confession. The Catherine Reynolds I thought I knew would never reveal such personal vulnerability, especially not to a subordinate she barely knew. "I'm sorry," I finally managed. "I didn't know." "No one does," she said, turning slightly. In the brief flash of lightning, I caught the glimmer of unshed tears in her eyes, turning them into mirrors that reflected both the storm outside and something equally turbulent within. It's not exactly the kind of thing you put in a company bio. Catherine Reynolds, orphaned at 12, built her first company at 23 to fill the void left by tragedy. She laughed, a brittle sound that held no humor. Not quite the inspiring leadership narrative people want to hear. The music changed then. Someone had connected a phone to a portable speaker, and the soft strains of a slow song filled the room. A few brave couples moved to the center of the hall, swaying awkwardly in the dim light, seeking comfort in human connection as the world raged outside. "Would you like to dance?" The words left my mouth before I could consider their implications. In the corporate world, such an invitation crossed invisible lines, blurring the carefully maintained boundaries between professional and personal. Catherine turned fully toward me, surprise evident on her face. For a moment, I thought she would refuse, perhaps even reprimand me for the inappropriate suggestion. Instead, she nodded almost imperceptibly, a gesture so slight I might have imagined it if not for the way she stepped away from the window, toward me. We moved to the edge of the makeshift dance floor, keeping a professional distance as we began to sway to the music. I could feel the tension in her shoulders, the careful way she held herself apart from me. Her perfume, subtle and expensive, mingled with the scent of rain and pine that permeated the lodge. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. "I'm sure there are plenty of people you'd rather spend time with than your boss. I saw how well you were getting along with the marketing team earlier." "Actually, you're the most interesting person here," I replied honestly. "Everyone else is still playing corporate politics, even now. You're the only one who seems real." She studied my face, searching for insincerity or ulterior motive. Finding none, something in her expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Careful. Honesty like that could be dangerous in our industry." A particularly loud crack of thunder shook the building, the sound so violent it seemed to reverberate through our bones. Catherine flinched, her hand tightening on my shoulder with surprising strength, nails digging through the fabric of my shirt. The lights flickered momentarily before plunging us back into the lantern-lit darkness. Around us, nervous laughter rippled through the crowd, a thin veneer over genuine fear. "Sorry," she whispered, attempting to regain her composure, consciously relaxing her grip. I could see the effort it took, the internal battle between instinctive fear and cultivated control. "It's okay to be scared sometimes," I said. "Even CEOs are human." Despite the rumors in the break room. She laughed softly, the sound surprisingly warm, like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Don't let that get around. I've worked very hard on my terrifying reputation. Do you know how many board meetings I've sat through where men explained my own business to me? Fear is sometimes the only language they understand." As we continued to dance, I felt her gradually relax, the space between us diminishing with each song. The storm outside intensified, wind screaming around the corners of the lodge, but inside, something was shifting, barriers slowly dissolving in the amber light. With each thunderclap, her flinch became less pronounced, as if proximity to another human being was slowly armoring her against her oldest fear. "You know," she said after a while, her voice low enough that only I could hear it, "I've read your file. Your work at Nexus Solutions was impressive. Particularly the adaptive algorithm you developed for their security protocol." "You read my file personally?" I couldn't hide my surprise. Catherine Reynolds oversaw a company of over 500 employees. The idea that she would take time to review the work history of a mid-level developer seemed improbable at best. "I read everyone's file. But yours stood out. You solved problems others couldn't even identify. That's rare." Her eyes met mine, direct and assessing. "You see patterns others miss. Including, apparently, in people." "Thank you," I said, genuinely surprised by the compliment. In the 3 months I'd worked at Meridian, this was the first personal acknowledgement I'd received from her. "I'm not easy to work for," she continued, a rueful note entering her voice. I'm sure you've heard the nicknames. The Ice Queen? I ventured, immediately regretting my candor. Corporate suicide, to repeat such things directly to her face. To my relief, she smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her features. That's one of the kinder ones. Corporate Valkyrie was creative, I'll give them that. Boardroom Barracuda, less so. If it helps, I don't think you're icy. Demanding, yes. Exacting, definitely. But that's because you care about the work. About getting it right. I hesitated, then added, people who don't care don't push for excellence. The music shifted to something slower, more intimate. Around us, most of the other dancers had retreated to the sidelines, leaving us nearly alone on the floor. The lantern light caught the auburn highlights in her dark hair, softened the sharp lines of her face. In this light, away from the harsh fluorescence of the office, she looked younger, more approachable. My husband used to say something similar, she said softly, a shadow passing over her features. Before he left. I'm sorry. Don't be. He couldn't handle being married to someone more successful than him. His loss. The words were practiced, a story she'd told herself so many times it had become truth. He wanted me to scale back, to focus on our relationship. What he meant was focus on his ego. But there was pain behind the practiced dismissal, a wound still raw despite her attempts to hide it. I recognized it because I carried similar scars, the price of ambition, of refusing to make yourself smaller to accommodate others' insecurities. Another crash of thunder, closer this time, the sound so immediate it felt like it was inside the room with us. The windows rattled ominously in their frames, and a collective gasp went through the room as the wind howled with renewed fury. Someone near the fireplace started crying softly, quickly hushed by their companions. Catherine trembled against me, her composure cracking like ice in spring. Without thinking, I pulled her closer, one hand moving to the small of her back in a protective gesture that crossed all professional boundaries. I felt her stiffen momentarily, then gradually yield, allowing herself this moment of human connection. It's okay, I murmured, my lips close to her ear. The storm will pass. They always do. She looked up at me, vulnerability and something else in her eyes, something I couldn't quite name. Recognition, perhaps. Understanding. For a moment, we weren't CEO and employee, we were just two people finding comfort in the midst of chaos, two souls recognizing something familiar in each other. The lodge manager appeared at the entrance to the hall, his weathered face grave in the lantern light. Water dripped from his rain gear, forming a small puddle at his feet. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we've received word that the access road has flooded. The bridge is underwater. Emergency services can't reach us until morning at the earliest. We're effectively cut off until the storm passes. Murmurs of concern rippled through the room, quickly rising in volume and intensity. I felt Catherine straighten in my arms, instantly transforming back into the leader everyone expected her to be. She stepped away from me, the moment between us already fading like mist. We have shelter, we have supplies, and we have each other, she announced, her voice steady and reassuring, cutting through the growing panic. This is just another problem to solve together. That's what we do at Meridian, we find solutions. As she organized people into groups and assigned tasks, checking supplies, securing windows, setting up comfortable sleeping arrangements, I marveled at her resilience, how quickly she could don the mantle of authority despite her personal fears. It wasn't that the fear had vanished, I could still see it in the tightness around her eyes, the too precise gestures of her hands. But she had mastered it, channeled it into productive action. Hours later, most of the staff had settled into makeshift sleeping arrangements throughout the lodge. The storm continued unabated, but the initial panic had subsided into a resigned acceptance. I volunteered to help check the building's integrity, making sure no windows had broken or leaks had formed from the relentless assault of wind and rain. I found Catherine in the lodge's small library, staring out at the storm, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She looked smaller somehow, without the power suits and the boardroom confidence. The soft glow of a single lantern illuminated the bookshelves around her, creating a cocoon of warm light in the darkness. "You should try to get some sleep," I said gently, not wanting to startle her. "Tomorrow will be challenging." "I can't," she replied without turning. "Not with that out there." Her voice held the weariness of someone who had been fighting the same battle for too long. "Every time I close my eyes, I'm 12 again, waiting by the window." I moved to stand beside her, watching the rain lash against the glass. The forest beyond was a chaotic blur of motion, trees bending to impossible angles in the wind. "Want some company?" She nodded, and we stood in comfortable silence for a while, the storm raging beyond the fragile barrier of glass and wood. Occasionally, the building would shudder under a particularly strong gust, and I would feel her tense beside me, fighting against instinctive fear. "You know what scares me most?" she said finally, her voice barely audible above the storm's fury. "Not the storm itself, but what it represents. The reminder that no matter how much control we think we have, how carefully we plan, how hard we work, nature, life, can sweep it all away in an instant. All the power, all the success, all the carefully constructed defenses, meaningless." "That's true," I agreed, watching raindrops trace chaotic patterns down the windowpane. "But that's also what makes the moments in between so precious. The impermanence gives them value." She turned to look at me, really look at me, perhaps for the first time. Not as a CEO assessing an employee, but as one human being seeing another. The lantern light caught in her eyes, turning them to amber. "Dance with me again?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the storm. There was no music this time, just the rhythm of the rain and our own heartbeats as we swayed slowly in the dim light of the library. I could feel her heart racing, her breath warm against my neck as she moved closer. The scent of her perfume mingled with the earthy smell of rain and the faint mustiness of old books surrounding us. "I'm always so alone," she whispered, the words seemingly torn from somewhere deep inside her. "Even in a room full of people who respect me, fear me, need me. I'm alone. In my office, in my home, in my life. Always the one making decisions, always the one others look to for strength." "Not tonight," I said softly, my hand tracing small circles on her back, feeling the knots of tension beneath expensive fabric. "Tonight, you can just be Catherine." The storm reached its peak, wind and rain battering the lodge with terrifying force. A branch struck the window with a crack like a gunshot, making both of us jump. Catherine pressed closer, her fingers digging into my shoulders, her face buried against my chest. I could feel her trembling, years of carefully maintained control crumbling under the weight of primal fear. "Please don't leave me tonight," she whispered, her voice breaking on the last word, the plea of a frightened child wrapped in the voice of a powerful woman. In that moment, I understood that her request wasn't inappropriate or unprofessional, it was deeply human. She didn't want romance or advantage, she simply couldn't bear to face her demons alone anymore. The storm had stripped away her defenses, leaving only raw need in their place. "I'll stay," I promised, my lips against her hair. "As long as you need." We talked through the night, the conversation flowing more easily as the hours passed and the storm gradually began to lose its fury. She told me about growing up in foster care after her parents died, bounced between homes where she was never quite wanted, about fighting her way through college on scholarships and determination, about clawing her way up through a male-dominated industry where every mistake was magnified and every success questioned. "I learned early that vulnerability was a luxury I couldn't afford," she said, curled beside me on a small leather couch, the blanket now wrapped around both of us. "Show weakness once, and they never let you forget it." I shared my own struggles, my father's progressive illness that had drained our family's resources and spirit, my failed engagement to someone who claimed to love my ambition but grew to resent it, my doubts about my career path and whether the sacrifices were worth the rewards. "Do you ever wonder if there's more?" I asked as the first hints of dawn lightened the sky outside. Beyond the next promotion, the next project, the next achievement? She was quiet for so long I thought she might have fallen asleep. Every